Good day, everybody, and welcome to More Financial Talk. I'm Ryan Moore, and with me today is co-host Tony Shore. How are you, Tony?
Oh, doing great, Ryan. I'm fantastic, but it's been crazy busy. And I know we were talking before the show. I always think I've had a busy week, and then you start telling me about your life, Ryan, and then then I really feel good about how much free time I have because this is a busy time of year for you, regardless, and you've got a lot going on there, right?
Absolutely. But let me be clear, I'm not complaining. I would also say I'm
No,
living my busiest and best. So
that's good.
it keeps me
That's
out of trouble. And, I'm at a stage in my life where they just tell me where to be and when to be there.
Yeah, well, that's nice. And I know that this time of year, a lot of people are getting their finances in order. This is when you meet and go over, do reviews with a lot of your clients. Of course, you do that all year long, but it seems before the end of the year, looking ahead at some tax planning. If you're in retirement, looking at charitable contributions before the end of the year. What should I do with my IRA and my investments? How am I looking? All of those things come into play. Healthcare costs and looking at Medicare. Those things are all happening right now, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, Medicare season's upon us.
Yeah.
People have to take RMDs before year end. Any folks that are trying to do Roth conversions that might have waited till closer to the end of the year to do those. So yeah, charitable donations, all the tax planning before year end. So yeah, it's a fun but busy time of year and a lot of moving parts, but we're well experienced at this. So um, onward and upward is what I like to say.
There you go.
So
Onward and upward. I
so Tony,
like it.
how's the weather doing up there in Minnesota as we are creeping through the fall? And I know down here in Tennessee today is a very good day for ducks.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, a lot of rain
Okay.
today. So
Wow. Okay. Well, here, actually, it's been pretty nice. I mean, it is getting colder at night. We're into the upper 30s at night
hmm,
already. That's a little chilly, but we're still hitting upper 50s, even 60, which for the fall here is great. And we've had pretty nice weather, a lot of sun. We actually had an extended summer. I mean, we had some record highs this fall. It usually doesn't stay this warm this late, but we're starting to feel that chill in the air, and the breeze is cold now. So I've ran the heat the last few nights, that's for sure. We switched from AC to heat, so that means we're headed into winter. But you know what? This time of year is actually one of the most beautiful here because all the leaves are turning. It's
yeah,
just like Tennessee. I mean, I lived in Nashville for 6 years and loved it, and do miss it, but get down there a lot, obviously. So that's awesome. But yeah, it's just been good here in Minnesota. Can't complain yet. It's not Minnesota yet. That'll come.
yeah.
That'll come all too soon. I don't
There you
want to
go.
rush it.
Well, we've had a great fall as well. I was actually just talking to my mom on the phone on my way into the office this morning. She's up in New Hampshire. That's where I
Oh,
grew up. And
yeah.
so checking in on her, and she says it's pretty brisk up there right now. So I don't miss all that. But anyway, it's we're in that transitional time of year and holidays are creeping up. Can't believe it's already almost November. What a blur this year's really kind of been. It's gone by very quick.
Oh yeah, it's been crazy. The years go by fast and the days go by slowly sometimes. But the older I get, it seems. Now, today you wanted to talk about. You used a great term, I thought. You said, "Tony, I want to talk about wealth building." And I like that. I like the sound of that. And you've got some tips for us on how to build that wealth. What are some of the wealth building tips you have for us today, or where do you want to start with this
Yeah,
topic?
sure. So, I mean, largely just want to cover what I believe to be some basics, but I think these are some good ideas. I mean, I'm always kind of brainstorming on what would have an impact on our podcast together and how I might benefit the listeners. And so, I'll start with this. It was years ago that I was working with a pretty renowned financial coach. And one of the things that he would say from time to time with the group of advisors that he was working with, we'd have, group Zoom calls and strategy type sessions, on how we can improve our business. And one thing that resonated with me was he would always say, how does your balance sheet look? If you're sitting there analyzing everybody else's investments and how they're structured, well, what if they wanted to see what you're doing with your money, right? And how is your wealth, or how is your situation shaping up? So are you walking the walk and not just talking the talk, walking the walk? You know what I mean? So I try to practice what I preach. And so I feel like, there's been some things along the way that have really helped us to get a bit ahead with things. And those are the things I wanted to talk about. So
Yeah,
I think,
excellent.
there's a list of things I want to go down, but let's start with just, like the 401k, which is what most people are using to try to build for retirement. And we might have touched on some of these topics in the past, but, we'll start there. And, the biggest tip from, I think a pretty obvious standpoint is if your company provides a match, you want to make sure that you're always contributing at least up to the match. So even if you have to stretch your budget a little bit, you really just do not want to leave free money on the table. So that's, a big benefit when you get a match. So the thought there is just to make sure you're not, losing any of that by not contributing enough. So the other idea as it relates to 401ks is try to contribute to the Roth. If 82% of publicly traded companies offer a 401k that allows you to contribute to Roth these days. And so most companies are going to make that available, and they don't advertise it. So a lot of times you have to, reach out to your HR department or call the group that is managing the 401k in terms of investments and determine if there is a Roth option. And the concept there briefly is just, we want to pay taxes on the seed instead of paying taxes on the harvest. And we've talked about Roth a lot in past shows, but really just keeping it basic here. If you can position yourself to be tax-free in retirement, then you're eliminating the government and the IRS as a partner in your accounts, which, eliminates legislative risk and tax rate risk. So try to contribute to the Roth. Now, when you do that, you're not going to get the tax deduction that you would get by contributing to the pre-tax side. But I think sometimes we can be nearsighted, essentially tripping over nickels and dimes when we could be really, getting to the bigger money if we're looking at a bigger picture and a longer term approach. So those are my tips as it relates to the 401k. Now, what many don't even realize, though, when they're contributing to their 401k, they are doing something called dollar cost averaging. So dollar cost averaging means that you're putting money in consistently over time. So for example, most folks are going to get paid every 2 weeks, and their contribution to their 401k is going to come right out of their paycheck. So therefore, they're dollar cost averaging on an every 2-week basis, meaning money's going to go in every 2 weeks. And as markets move up and down, okay, you're going to be buying in at different price points. And so when markets have a corrective period, you're going to be buying in at lower prices per share, which ultimately over time, dollar cost averaging averages the cost of what you're buying in at lower, thus creating a greater profit margin for growth over time. So dollar cost averaging kind of happens automatically when you're contributing to a 401k by way of your paycheck. But many folks are going to invest or contribute beyond their 401k, which is something I also recommend. So there, right, we would want to consider maybe a self-directed Roth, which is a way to get even more money in the Roth. Now, there's rules and limitations and all of this, and today's not about breaking all that down, but ultimately, if you're contributing to a Roth and you're over the age of 50, this year you can contribute $8,000. If you're under 50, it's 7,000. Now, what a lot of people will do is they'll wait to the end of the year and they'll stroke one check and make that contribution all at once. One idea would be to set up a plan where you're dollar cost averaging into your traditional IRA that's self-directed, or your Roth self-directed IRA. So I did the math beforehand, but if you're in the 8,000 a year max contribution, being over age 50, that's $667 a month. So if you set up your account to where every month it's making that deposit, then that's how you're going to dollar cost average and buy in at, a lower price per share over time.
Yeah.
If it's the 7,000 a year max, that's $583 a month. So as we're leading into the new year, this is something that people could get on track for January and slowly, incrementally contribute to these accounts, which I think over time, the dollar cost averaging approach has proven to be very successful. So there's a couple of tips there. And even if it's not IRA, if it's just a traditional type of investment account, which would be a non-retirement account, what we call a non-qualified account. So if you're contributing to a mutual fund or a stock and you're trying to build up other savings outside of your retirement accounts, and this is something I'm trying to teach my kids. I've got young kids, and right now my oldest is 18. He's a freshman in college, and I've helped him set up a Roth. So he's contributing up to what he makes through his part-time job. So getting them started earlier, teaching how to stay disciplined and make those contributions on a consistent basis. That's ultimately one great way to build wealth over time. The power of compounding interest, which is what Albert Einstein called the eighth wonder of the world, really, can grow your money exponentially over time if you stay disciplined and stay the course. So that's a little bit on how to save, I think, wisely to build wealth through dollar cost averaging.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm glad you explained dollar cost averaging. And that's why it works so well 401ks, IRAs, and that compounding interest. If you're regularly buying in, you're buying when the market's down as well as going up. So it really works out. If people who don't work with a financial advisor and don't dollar cost average, if they try to time the market or if they do all their investing themselves, what they end up doing, I think the stats are pretty crazy. They're between 85 and 95% of people who invest end up buying high and selling low. And so you want to avoid that by dollar cost averaging, right?
And I mean, if you look at where the market conditions are right now, we're at all-time highs, right? So do you really want to plunk down a big chunk of money when we're at all-time highs? So dollar cost averaging is a way to kind of, slowly move the money into investments and not put it all at the, the peak of the market, which we don't know ultimately where things are going. My crystal ball's on the fritz again. So, that being said, I think that, that's a wise approach. And, if you go back to 2008, right, that's one that everybody remembers where the S&P was down 38% for the year. Well, if you weren't retired at that point, what were you doing? You continued to invest in your 401k. So it was kind of like plugging the hole in terms of things going down, and you're just continuing to buy at lower prices per share. So when the markets did turn and we had a tremendous rebound, you're creating a greater profit margin for growth. And so you want to stay disciplined in the good times and in the bad. And I think over time, it will absolutely pay off.
Yeah. Well, I think so too. And I'm glad you mentioned Roths and are talking about that a little, because now it's not only wealth building tips, that's a tax-free wealth building tip, right? For that, you don't have to pay taxes on that money when you take it out in retirement. All the growth and the principal, it all comes out tax-free in retirement if you do have it in a Roth. So that is a really good wealth building tip. That's a good way to grow your money. I made my daughter, when she was 21, opened a Roth, and she puts a couple $100 into it every month. By the time she's 65, if she keeps it up, she'll be set.
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, I always perk up when you say tax-free, Tony. So you get me excited over here.
Yeah, tax. When you say the word tax, people get bummed out. But if you follow it by the word free, all of a sudden now we're talking tax.
That's right.
Yeah.
So great segue for my next tip, which is let's touch on HSAs, health savings accounts. Okay. So this is one that, I certainly meet plenty of folks that have HSAs, but not everybody does. It's not a widely discussed topic. But a health savings account is really one of the best things out there, even beyond Roth, quite frankly, because it's double tax-free.
Right.
So when you contribute to an HSA, you get a tax deduction, right? if you think about the IRA or the traditional 401k, you get the tax deduction, but then you're deferring taxes. So when you take it out later, then you have to pay the taxes.
And it's a larger amount then, too. You've got all that money and all that growth. You have to pay taxes on all of it.
Sure. So you've
Now,
done a great job at helping the government grow their future tax revenue, but that might not have been the intention.
HSAs are, I've heard they're the only vehicle in the IRS tax code that allows you to put money in tax-free, it grows tax-free, and comes out tax-free.
Bingo.
All three, right?
And that's why I love it. So, and with that, some people will have HSAs and they don't realize that they could, essentially set up an HSA brokerage account where they could actually get it invested for more growth than just sitting more stagnant.
Sure.
I guess it just all depends on your risk tolerance and how you want to approach that. But, for me, here's what I've done, Tony. And I don't mind, sharing my situation. I'm kind of an open book, as you know, but so years ago, we were on a group health insurance plan for my family, and I realized I was not contributing to an HSA and I was missing out. So I started to explore that more, and we changed our healthcare plan. And ultimately, I was willing to take on an HSA plan that increased our health insurance costs by $1,000 a month.
Wow.
And the only reason why I did it was to get access to the HSA.
Yeah.
Because with that, now as a family, I believe the limit this year is right around $8,300 for the family, right? But here's how I'm approaching it. So I don't want to use my HSA every time I turn around and there's a health situation. I actually want to build this bucket. And my goal is to build the HSA and grow it tax-free so that when I get to a Medicare age, then I can use my HSA account to pay my Medicare premiums and my Medicare cost.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to.
And your drug copays and your ambulance, what the insurance doesn't cover, or if you ever need a doctor out of pocket. I mean, most couples 65 and older have $200,000 to $300,000 worth of healthcare expenses in retirement, and that doesn't even count long-term care. So imagine that HSA money is going to sit there and they can pull it out tax-free to pay all these things.
Yeah, I agree. And so when people, tap into their HSA every time there's something health related and don't build it, I cringe a little bit because you're not really giving it, the ample amount of opportunity to grow tax-free.
Sure.
And I do think there's something to be said for planning for down the road and building these buckets of money that can be there for you so that you're taking strain off of your day-to-day income to maintain your standard of living. Because health issues can pop up all the time.
Oh, yeah.
And ultimately you can be better prepared for that by having a plan and how to save for health expenses in the future. And I think an HSA is a great way to do that.
Yeah. I mean, once people hit like age 70 or 75, those health expenses, you think, well, I've got Medicare. I don't need money for healthcare in retirement. Oh, there are still costs. With Medicare, there's still premiums. There's still copays. There's still out-of-pocket that you have to pay, and a lot of expenses, not to mention long-term care. So, and hearing, vision, dental, that can all be covered by your HSA money. So that comes in very handy in retirement. And people that are starting just now, people who started with HSAs are starting to hit that age where they can start using them in retirement. They haven't been around that long. And the ones that did save them until retirement are really happy they did.
Absolutely. And more companies are now offering HSA benefits and HSA matching, which again, you want to capitalize on all of that. But it is very rare that I run into somebody that has a big bucket in the HSA category, whether it's 50 grand to 100 grand. When I see that, I really commend that individual or couple. Kudos to them for having that foresight and knowing that that's a great way to save for the future for their healthcare expenses. So that's a big one in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's huge. So what's another big wealth building tip you have for us today?
Well, this one may not be so much about building wealth, but it is important, which is having an emergency fund, right?
Oh, yeah.
So with that, we can't invest every last dollar because if something pops up in our life and we need to fix our car or our roof or whatever, a kid needs help with something, we don't want to have to be pulling out of our investments all the time, which is disrupting, the growth pattern. So ultimately, in our industry, it's recommended to have at least 6 months of living expenses in an emergency fund, i.e. the bank. So with that, though, we want to make sure we're not saving too much in the bank. And I've probably said this before, the only way you make money in a bank is to own the bank. All right. Because essentially, if you look at whatever interest the bank's paying you and you look at your ROR, real rate of return, so they're going to pay you interest, but then you have to factor in what are the taxes on that interest and what is the inflation rate. So historically in the banking industry, you don't really get ahead. You're more or less breaking even.
Right.
And so for that reason, we don't want to have too much in the bank. That's where we lose on opportunity cost. So even if you're getting 5% on a CD and you don't take that interest out, okay, you're still going to get a 1099 from that love letter from the IRS that you
Right.
owe the taxes on the interest that you didn't even take. So what that
Right.
means is you're actually growing your money at simple interest instead of compounding,
Right.
which would have Albert Einstein rolling over in his grave.
Right.
You know what I mean?
That's a big problem with CDs that a lot of people don't understand with bank CDs is that, and I didn't understand this until I had to help my dad. His father passed away. He inherited a CD. He put it in his own CD. I wish he would have waited and listened to me, maybe a MIGA, to earn more money. But he got a deal, and when the interest rates were high, it wasn't bad. The problem is I didn't realize it at the time. I wish I had talked to you first. When he did that, what happened was it was like a 2-year CD, right, or 3-year.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and he locked in a decent rate for that amount of time. However, I didn't realize that he had to leave it in the 3 years, but yet, so he couldn't take it out without penalty. But if he left it in, it didn't matter. At the end of the first year, he got a tax 1099.
Yeah.
And so he had to pay taxes on the growth for each year it was in there, even though he couldn't remove the money if he wanted to. Now, I get when you take the money out, they want you to pay taxes on the gains. Okay, that's, some vehicles are like that. But in this case, you have to pay taxes on the gains whether you take it out and use it or not. It's very frustrating.
Yeah, and that's inefficient as far as trying to build wealth and grow money. So the message
Right.
there is have the right amount for an emergency fund, but just know that it's serving two purposes, safety and accessibility, but not
Yeah.
really growth. Okay. But let's move on to another topic. And the next
Okay.
one I'll bring up is real estate.
Okay.
So real estate, there's a method to, if you have a mortgage. So this is folks that are, have a mortgage payment. And, the common mortgage is going to be a 30-year fixed interest mortgage. And, I learned this years ago, but if you can make just one extra mortgage payment a year, you will take 4 to 6 years off of the life of that mortgage and literally save tens of thousands of dollars. And I believe you're kind of beating the banks at their own game by doing that. Now, when I say make one extra payment a year, that might be difficult for some to stroke, a whole one payment check at any point in time. But one way to do it, and this is what I do, I practice what I preach with this, is I take 1/12 of my minimum mortgage payment and add it to each payment every month. So by the end of the year, I've made one extra payment. And so I don't feel the brunt of that as much. But ultimately, I'm building equity. I'm paying off that loan faster and shaving years off of the loan, ultimately beating the banks at their own game. So that is a tip I try to share with anybody that I meet that still has a mortgage, is just try to make 1/12 extra towards your payment every month and shave years off of the life of that mortgage and build equity faster.
Wow, that's another great tip, and I'm glad you talked about that. I'd heard that before, but it's been a few years, and I think people need a reminder. A lot of people aren't doing that, and if you're not, you should. That's really, so you have to skip. Maybe you say, well, I don't want to be paying extra. I need that money. But do you? Is it that much each month? I think there's ways to make it happen, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'll reference somebody that's local to our community here, which is pretty well-known fella by the name of Dave Ramsey.
Oh yeah, I know
Right.
Dave.
Yeah. So he's big on helping people get out of debt. And I,
Yep.
believe in what he's doing for the right group of people.
Yeah,
for a
the debt
segment of
thing
the
is great.
population.
Yeah, the debt, getting out of debt is good, and that's what he's good at, and I think that's the I admire that aspect of what he does and his
I agree.
ministry. Yeah,
There are some things I'm not necessarily jiving with him,
yeah,
but some of the basics of what he's doing for a certain group of people makes perfect sense in my mind. But
yeah.
so on my ride home from work at night or workshop or whatever, he's on the radio, so I'll listen to some of the people calling in and just kind of follow what the scenarios are, circumstances of the individual.
Sure.
But what you hear him talk about a lot is, really just kind of downplaying your life to get, for a certain stretch of time to get in a better position. So,
Right.
he'll talk about eating franks and beans, right? So there's always areas in our life where we can cut back a little bit
Oh, sure.
or curb, our desires to better position ourselves for the future. So look, if you want, immediate gratification at all times, then you're probably not going to be one that's going to be a great saver and live a comfortable retirement, because you're going to react to impulses and not have the right discipline. So discipline is a huge part of all of this, having a plan, setting goals. But, I think we can all stretch ourselves. I mean, it's amazing when people hit hard times, what we realize we're actually capable of until we get to those hard times. So I think there are ways for us to stretch a little bit to better position for the future. And it's not easy to do, but it will pay off down the road. So on that note, let's talk credit cards.
Okay.
Okay. So look, credit cards, I think, can be absolutely tremendous tools. I'm not one that wants to, put a bunch of stuff on credit cards and then manage minimum payments. I don't approach credit cards that way at all. But what I do approach them in this way, which is I try to charge everything I can on a credit card. So between my wife and I, we've got 2 business credit cards and 1 family credit card. And every time we're making any kind of a purchase, we try to put it on the credit card so that we can get the free miles, right?
Yep.
We want the rewards. That's like free money. Okay. So over years, we've accumulated miles that can help us take a family vacation. We've got a family of 6. So, I mean, with the right card, you can use those miles for air travel, flights, rental cars, hotel stays. So all of those things are beneficial when you like to travel, etc. So, I'm going to throw out a credit card name that we use, and I did my research, but I really like the Capital One Venture card. The one where the commercials say, "What's in your wallet?"
Yep.
Because for every dollar you spend, you get 2 miles. And ultimately, you start to bank those and build them up, and you could have an amazing vacation for your whole family. It might take year 2 or 3, depending on how much you're putting on your credit cards, but it's like getting something for nothing. And we'll pay off the credit cards at the end of every month. So they're not gaining any interest off us. I'm not, building a bunch of debt. I'm just using my everyday payments through credit cards and having the discipline to pay it off so we can bank the miles. Actually, in the last year or 2, I told my wife, I said, I don't want to use these miles anymore for our family trips. We're going to find other ways to pay that, because I want to bank these miles. And so what we're doing now is, my plan is to not touch any of these miles until retirement. I want to
There
build
you
so
go.
many miles that we've got this big bucket of resources
Kind
to
of like the
travel like we
HSA.
want, just like the HSA. So
Wait for retirement, and then you've got your health care covered, and you're going to have your travel covered for retirement. That's great. That's
yeah, and
very
it's
smart.
all planning, right? And
Yeah.
it's being proactive. It's looking out ahead. What do we want the vision of our retirement to look like, and then how are we going to achieve that? And then let's reverse engineer how we get there. And these are some of the methods that we're doing to try to better position ourselves for the future.
Yeah.
So I would fully take advantage of credit card rewards. Now, the cash back stuff is nice, but that's not going to build me resources to go do
No.
something with it. So I'm all prone to the travel miles is our approach.
Yeah, I think people who have researched it usually end up at that point. The travel ones are usually the most rewarding. And I like that concept and what you're doing there. But again, as you mentioned, that only works if you have the discipline to pay it off, the discipline and the wherewithal to pay those off each month. And that's how that can really work for you.
Absolutely. So, Tony, to round this out a little bit, okay, I think the last message here is, one of the things that I see with a lot of folks is almost all of their savings, if they've got whatever they've got in the bank, but then most of it is all in the market, right? And so that makes people susceptible to what's called systemic risk. So if all your money's in the market, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, if we experience like we did in 2022, where everything went down, it was the first year in 40 years that both stocks and bonds were down by more than 10% double digits. And so if you're totally exposed and that's where all of your wealth and your planning is focused in the market, then you're going to be susceptible to some big corrective periods. Inevitably, we experience those. Now, markets have always come back, but the period in which it corrects, and then by the time it comes back, that can be a challenging period for many during that. So the message there is, let's make sure that we are building wealth in what I would call uncorrelated buckets. Okay. Things that aren't all moving in the same direction of what the markets are doing. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I've got it really boiled down to 5 buckets, and real estate is one bucket. So even if it's just your primary residence, you're building equity, you're building wealth in your primary home. If you're fortunate enough to be in a position to have a rental house or a vacation house and add more real estate to your overall portfolio, I'm all for that as well, because that's not going to always act like markets are doing. Real estate markets are going to be real estate markets. But ultimately, I think having real estate in one bucket, another one would be the market bucket. So stocks, bonds, mutual funds is a bucket, but we just don't want to be so concentrated there that we're beholden to whatever markets are going to do, because we live in a world that is smaller than it's ever been. Things can happen overseas that will impact our markets overnight. And, it can blindside us like a black swan event, like COVID. Yeah. So stocks, bonds, mutual funds would be bucket 2. And then precious metals. The benefit of owning gold or silver or even platinum or palladium is they're not correlated to the markets necessarily. And with that, they're also considered largely an inflation hedge. So we have a devaluing dollar with the amount of inflation that we've experienced. And with that, precious metals can be an offset to inflation. So I think having some exposure to gold and silver in particular, and I think, you'd have to have your head in the sand to not realize what's been going on with gold and silver in the last several months.
Right.
And I don't think it's stopping here. We might have had a little pause and a bit of a pullback in the gold sector, but I do think that ultimately we're going higher. And, when you have more and more geopolitical issues that go on in the world, that can be a safe haven. So I think accumulating a bit more in the precious metal category, even 10% of your nest egg, I think would be a minimum but appropriate allocation. And then the next one would be insurance strategies, which, when you have an annuity that is not directly in the market. So the indexed annuity type. So when markets go down, you get a zero. You don't lose anything. That's sometimes where we say zero is hero. But we like the annuities that are providing guaranteed streams of income. So it's always working hard, but it's not going to dip when markets correct. So that's not necessarily correlated to the markets if you're using it for income and safety. So using a piece of the puzzle, piece of the pie for insurance strategies. Or we've talked in the past about a life insurance retirement plan, which is using universal life as an investment, where you have cash value that can grow with the upside of the market, but without the downside risk. And that is another way to grow money tax-free. And therefore, you've got that bucket that's ultimately providing benefits and growth. But when markets drop, you're not going to lose. So having the right insurance strategies is another bucket that can be uncorrelated. And then lastly, more innovationally speaking, if that's a word, innovationally, but with innovation upon us, okay, I'm speaking about cryptocurrency and blockchain technology. I don't believe that this space is as speculative anymore. I think it's inevitable. I think it's unfolding before our eyes. And so to find a way to gain some allocation to that space, whether it's a Bitcoin ETF or, with Gradient, who's our money manager, as you know, they have the digital discovery portfolio. And I've got
Yeah.
more and more clients that are, well into retirement that are dipping their toes in this space because, for one, they don't want this innovative revolution to pass them by. They're hearing about
Right.
it on the news all the time. And ultimately, it gives them ability to get some access in that space without having to maybe go open up a crypto wallet that is very unfamiliar and uncomfortable and can get hacked and this and that. So we try to make folks or give them access to that space with the right protective guardrails in place,
Sure.
using ETFs and that type of thing. And so,
Invest in the industry rather than directly into Bitcoin itself. That digital media portfolio, I love that because it does allow you to invest in it in the market without actually buying Bitcoin and having to
mhm.
open up the crypto wallet, things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, instead of buying gold physically and storing it, you can buy a gold ETF that tracks the price of gold.
Yeah.
It's very
Precious
similar.
metals in the
Yeah,
market. Yeah.
exactly. So, I mean, and this isn't just the world according to Ryan here. I read a lot of books and, a lot of perspectives, and I do think it makes very good sense to make sure that you're not so concentrated that, you're going to be exposed to, everything being correlated to the same conditions of what's going on in the world and in the economy. So I think that's
Right.
a way to help mitigate risk, which ultimately not losing money is like making money. And that is another way of building wealth.
There you go. Well, I think it's been a great discussion today. Before we go, let our listeners know how they can set up a no charge, no obligation consultation with you and your team there.
Absolutely. So we can be reached directly at area code 615-467-6300. You can also email our office at info@rsgtn.com or check out our website at rsgtn.com.
All right. Thanks, Ryan. And listeners and viewers, thanks for tuning in. That does it for this episode of More Financial Talk with our host, Ryan Moore.